All right, so let's do a demo. And I'll teach you some of the basics, some of the most fundamentals of Flex. And of course, there are numerous articles that you can read about Flex, but sometimes they go too much in depth. So I just want to give you some of the high-level introduction that could maybe make things easier. So here's an example. So let's say I have a browser and I got four things. And notice that there's spacing here, there's spacing here, it's evenly spaced. But I can also make this flexible. As I make this flexible, these gap stay consistent. Let's say 20 pixels. But the size of these container is flexible. Okay? Like that, right? It stretches, it also shrinks. So in order to do something like this, and let's say this is the HTML, how would you do it? Okay, so I'm just going to save this. And of course, when I save it and display it, this is going to display 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so there are many ways to do it. So I'm just kind of showing you my thought process. Is okay, if I want that 1, 2, 3, 4 section, these sections, to be flexible, well, one way is, okay, let's put this in a container. I can do a division, I can do a section, or I can do some of the either HTML5 tags. And then you basically create a container and you say anything inside, immediate element inside that, I want to make it flexible. Okay, and in essence, these four divisions are what we want to make it flexible, right? So here, let's just give it a class. And because I only have one section, technically I don't have to give a class because in the style I can just say section. But hey, I may have other sections. So for now, let me just create a section and call it maybe flex container. Just to indicate that the immediate elements inside this is going to be all flexible. Okay, so I would do section that has a class flex container. And then what would we do? I like to just do things just one at a time. So let's give it a silver border just so that we can see it. Okay, does that look right? And okay, notice that there is some spacing here. What's causing that spacing? Right, you can do inspect element, of course, and you can find out what's causing that spacing. Is it the section? It turns out it's the body, right? When I highlighted the body, notice that it shows that pink color, meaning it's that margin. The body has a margin. Okay, well, you can do the CSS reset and say, hey, everything, let's just make the margin 0 pixel and padding 0 pixel. That may not be a bad practice. And of course, when I do that, right, notice how the margin disappeared when I reload it, right? But maybe for this, okay, so let's do this. Okay, so there are, again, many ways that you can do it. Maybe the flex container, let's say I do want to put a margin. Just to make it easier, should we just put 20 pixels on all around? Okay, maybe that's a little too much. Maybe 10 pixels is enough. Okay, there it is, right? And let me make this a little bit like this so that you can see this a little bit better. And I can do like this. Okay, so the margin looks good, but it's almost too close too, right? It's too crowded. Let's put some padding inside the flex container. Okay, so maybe padding, should we just go with 10 pixel? I know in the video I said 15 or 20. Let's just go with 10. Okay, so I put some padding here. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. These are 4 divisions as we can see on the right. But again, I want to make it flexible. I want to have this stretch, shrink, and so forth. So what you say is here, you say display flex. And of course, you want to be consistent. If I put a space after the colon, you want to be consistent. So if I do it, make it flex, notice that by default, it's going to put everything in a single row, right? If I want to put it in a single column, you can do that. But most of the time, we just want to put it in a single row. So we do display flex, and notice that it's like that. And then this is where we can do, okay, inside flex section dot flex container division, I want to specify some width. If I just made the display flex, all the divisions just going to be as big as the content. what if I want to actually give it like a preferred width? Not an absolute width that it has to abide, but it, just here. This is what I can say. Hey, each division here, okay, I'm going to give you some rule. The way that I think of it is, okay, have it be, I prefer each of these flex containers to be, let's say, 200 pixels, but allow it to stretch 1 and allow it to shrink also by 1, all equally. Okay, and you can read the article to read more about what this means. If you have another element, and I'll maybe give that demo. So here, once I do it, notice that, okay, it stretched it, and it made it flexible. Okay, very cool, but it's kind of hard to see the size of this container. So I can say, what do you guys want to do? Should we put a border? Border 1 pixel solid silver. Maybe we do that. Ah, that looks very ugly. And notice there's no gap. I want it to be some spacing between these elements, right? And so here, I believe in the flex container, you say, okay, the immediate children inside this, make it flexible, but put some gap. And let's say I want to put 10 pixel gap so that it's not so close because that's claustrophobic, right? So you put 10 pixel pad spacing, and notice, isn't that beautiful? Flex just did it automatically. If you had to do this with margin, then the first element, maybe you give less margin, the last element, yeah, but this is beautiful. It did it so quickly. Now I can do other things. I can put a border radius if you want and say, hey, make the radius curve a little bit. Yeah, that kind of looks ugly. Maybe 10 pixels better. Okay, but notice it's so close to the border too. How do I do it so that the content is not so close to the border? Padding. So maybe I put 10 pixels padding here. Nice, it looks better, right? Okay, and I can also give this a minimum height and say, hey, this division, I told you to be flexible, but I also want you to have a minimum height of, let's say, 150 pixel. And then let's see how this works. Did it not work? Minimum height. Is it not minimum height? It is minimum height. 150 pixels. Okay, let's do it again. Okay. Why didn't, oh, I had a spelling error. Okay, yeah, okay. All right, well, so yeah, okay, so with the spelling error corrected, 150 pixel. I can also put a background color of, let's say, EEE. It's a very lightish gray, and there it is. Notice this. It's cool. It's flexible, right? And this 1-1, the way to understand it is, imagine you hire a worker to stretch this, to stretch this, to stretch this, to stretch that. It's basically what I'm saying is all the division, all of them have one worker stretching it. This one also has one worker stretching it. This one also had one worker stretching it. This also has one worker stretching it and stretching it. This is the stretching agent, and this is the shrinking agent. But for example, I want to give a special class here. And here, let's say, the class that has special, I want to give some new rule. I want to override. So here, for example, what I'll say is, do you know what? This special one, make it 200 pixel, but don't allow it to stretch. Don't allow it to shrink. And if I do this, look at this. 3 is 200 pixels, and it doesn't shrink, it doesn't stretch. What if I say, hey, I believe the first one is stretch. Allow it to stretch equally, just like others, but don't allow it to shrink. Notice this. Then this will also shrink. This also stretches too. So if I look at 3, okay, notice that 250 is 250 pixels instead of 200. This is really nice too. When you do this flex and using inspect element, it will also tell you, right? You can see the gap that it caused. You can also see seeing that arrow. See that arrow on the 3? Notice that that's how much it was stretched. You can also shrink it, and then you can kind of see how much it shrank. It's really cool. This inspect element is going to give you some tools. What if I say, hey, like this special, like imagine there are 10 workers stretching, the division class special, but only give one worker. So 1, 2, 4, don't allow it to stretch as much as division special, which you're going to allow 10 of the workers to go there and stretch. So of course, if I do this and stretch, 3, notice how 3 stretches a lot more, right? Stretches a lot more than the others. So that's basically what it is. It's a relative strength of the worker, basically stretching or shrinking that element. Okay, so that's it. That's how you can do it. There's another really cool thing with the flex. And let me show you. Okay. So, and again, that I think that's like the high level of what flex is. If you want the first element to be on the right side and then go this way instead of left to right, then hey, there you can study and see how that is done. There is a way to do it. If you want it to go in a column instead of a row, then there's that special command. But I mean, like, not too many times you will do it unless, yeah, I mean, there are some use cases, but anyway. Okay, so here, there is another really cool thing, which is, notice how each of the division, I gave it a preferred width of 200 pixel. Now, notice that all of them try to stay in the same row, right? It doesn't go over the boundary. But here's an interesting thing that you can play with, and you can read more about it. On this, notice that we did display flex, and I think there is a flex wrap. Yeah. And I say, hey, allow it to wrap. Like if I have maybe one of the best example is if I have an Excel spreadsheet here, and let's wait for this to open up. If I have, okay, it's taking a little bit of time, but let's go ahead and just start a new blank book. And if I type something like this, right, it just goes over, right? Just imagine this is the container or the border. It just goes over, right? And I can also have this, how do I do it? Format cells and maybe the alignment. And you can say, hey, wrap text around. Notice that it just wraps the text around so then it doesn't go outside the border. It just kind of wraps it around it, right? So you can also do that with flex and say, yeah, so remember I said my preferred width for these is 200 pixels, but allow it to stretch or shrink. You know, right now I basically said by default, don't wrap it. Just make sure it's all in the same row. Make sure it doesn't go over the border. So here, if I do flex rep and wrap, notice this. When it could be 200 pixels, it puts it there. But when it cannot be 200 pixels, yes, it can shrink. But notice how the 4 is that it wraps it around, right? To still keep it inside the border. So that's really cool, right? And then it does something really interesting. So if the browser width, notice here, is about 330 pixel, each of these, they said, okay, you told me that you prefer it to be 200 pixels, so you kind of honored it, right? And then when it's like 400 pixel, then you can see it puts 2 elements. 3, right? I said I don't want it to shrink, so anyway, you can play with this and kind of see how it behaves. It's really, really cool. You can basically give different flexibility to each of the elements and do this. And again, the CSS is very, very cool. By doing a gap, it automatically put a gap here and here. It's really nice. It's really beautiful. Okay, let's just look at one more example. Okay, so this one, when you're laying out a website, how would you do something like this? Notice the aside doesn't shrink nor stretch. It's a fixed width, right? But the main stretches and so forth. Now, this is how the CSS looks, HTML looks like. And of course, if I reload this, it's not going to have anything, right? So how would you make something like that work? Here I have a section 2. So again, same thing. Let's do flex container. And again, that's not really needed, but I like to just do it anyway because I might have another section that maybe I don't want to make it flexible. So this one, I'll put it here. And then again, just one at a time. Don't try to do too many things. So let's just put a silver border, okay? But it's too claustrophobic. My content is right next to the border. I don't want that. Let's put a 10 pixel spacing just so that it's not so close. Okay, that looks a little better. And then the main and aside, I want that to be flexible and have it be in the same row, right? So how would I do that? I say, okay, section.flexContainer, all your children, immediate children elements, which would be main and aside, I want that to be flexible. So you say flex, display flex. Now, of course, it's going to put it right next to each other because you haven't given it a preferred width. How do we give it a preferred width? Well, we can say section, okay, main. And of course, you don't need to do this. I just like to over-specify and I like to indent the code so to know that this main is a subset of this. But anyway, you do this and you say, okay, I told you to be flexible, but I'm going to give you some rule. Do you have any workers to help you stretch? Yeah. Do you have any worker to help you shrink? Yeah. Okay, what's your preferred width? I don't know, 300 pixel? Okay, just do that. And then for the aside, right, we have an HTML tag called aside. So same thing. Okay, do I want you to be do I want you to stretch? Nah. Do I want you to shrink? Nah. What's your preferred width? 200 pixel. And because they're not flexible, it should always be 200 pixel if you do it like this, right? Okay, so if I do this, there it is, but it's hard to see what's causing that spacing. So I can do background color, maybe yellow, maybe background color, right? You can put a border if you want, right? I don't know, should I do red? Okay, so there it is, and you can give it a minimum height. 350 pixels maybe? Okay, and notice the flexible items, if one height changes, it also makes the other flexible container also stretch. I actually didn't have to do minimum height on this. It automatically stretched it, which is good. But notice there is no gap. It's right next to each other. How do we separate it? Gap. Put some gap. Hey, all my flexible children, put a gap. Give some spacing. Let's say 15 pixels of gap. Okay, there you go. You created 15 pixels of gap right there. That's cool. And then you can even give some padding, right? Because again, this main content and the aside text is right next to the border. I don't like that. So you can say, for example, give it some padding, 10 pixel. You can also give this padding, 10 pixels. And if you do that, okay, notice it gives some spacing there and it stretches, right? And you can make this border radius and do things. But it's really cool, right? It does it. Hey, what if I want to do it so that I want to allow some wrapping feature so that if it is too small, allow this aside instead of forcing it to be on the same row, allow it to wrap to the next row. Well, you know, that's easy. Okay. You say, okay, I told you to be flexible, but allow flex rep to be wrap instead of none or whatever the default behavior is. And if you do that, then let's see what happens. Okay. And again, you kind of have to play with the width. 200 here. Okay, let's make this a little bit more interesting. Maybe I say, okay, I prefer you to be 400 pixel. Oh, okay. You also got to spell it right. Okay, see? It did that. Okay. So when and of course I can do inspect element. I told it I want it to be 400 pixel. That's what I prefer. It stretched a little bit. Notice the arrow, the purple arrow. But then when the container size, right, 715 pixel. Hold on, maybe the body 673, right? When it couldn't make this 400 pixel, and this was 200 pixel, and there are spacings and so forth, it allowed it to wrap. So in this case, if I allowed it to wrap and actually wanted this to also be a little bit taller, then I could have also done minimum height, 350 pixels, like that, right? Minimum height, okay. Always gotta be very careful with every single character, and there it is. Now, I could say, hey, okay, I don't want you to shrink, but I want you to stretch. Then I could have changed this to 1. And if I did this, what would happen is it would stretch because now you have a worker who stretches that container, right? Notice this. And then when it goes a little bit bigger, then it snaps right there, right? Because it is trying to meet what you said. You said you want it to be flexible, but you prefer it to be 300 pixels, 400 pixels. Of course, right? If you didn't have it, then it will try to force everything into a single row. But because you said, hey, like honor my preference, and if you can't honor it, hey, you're allowed to wrap it around into the next line, then you're gonna have that behavior. Of course, every browser may have slightly different behavior, so you gotta play with this and see if it works on Chrome and other browsers of your choice, but that's something for you to play around with. Okay? All right, I hope that was helpful.